Hi everyone, welcome to your first video of our new unit. We are going to be reading the book of Mice and Men. This is a very famous novel. You might have heard of it, or you might know people that have read it. Your parents might have read it in high school. It's a classic. And I'm really excited to hear what you all think about it because I have literally seen students cry at the ending of this book. I have seen students throw this book across the room because they're so frustrated or surprised at how things go down. And this book is also super controversial. There are people that think it should not be read or taught anymore in high schools. So I'm excited to hear your reactions if you like the book and if you think it should still be taught in English classes. So today, our objective is that we are going to read the first chapter. I think it's the first 16 pages, and understand the historical context and the setting of the novel. So as you watch this video, you're taking some Cornell notes in your packet, and we are going to get started. So this is the author of the novel of Mice and Men. His name is John Steinbeck. And the question you're thinking about is, how did Steinbeck reflect a specific time and place in his writing? So John Steinbeck, he's from California. He is from this part of California called the Salinas River Valley. It's a little bit north of Los Angeles and San Francisco. And Steinbeck was born in the early 1900s. So he lived from 1902 to 1968. He lived in, like I said, this part of California, and he also wrote about that part of California in all of his books. So Of Mice and Men is actually set in the Salinas River Valley of California, which is where Steinbeck is from. Steinbeck came from a family that was not very wealthy. When he went to college, he was working on a sugar plant, doing manual labor in order to pay for his college. He never actually completed his degree at school, which I think is really interesting. He's this famous author. He became super successful, but he never even graduated from college. So while he was working, he was doing manual labor on farms. And through this work, he met a lot of people called migrant workers. So at the time in the 1930s, they were also called hobos. But these were people that were moving from place to place in order to work on farms and do farm work. And this influenced what he wrote about in his novels a lot. So John Steinbeck wrote about people who were poor, who were struggling financially. He really showed the reality of the times, that people were struggling to make ends meet and that they didn't have a lot of money. So this is similar to the play A Raisin in the Sun that we read in semester 1. This book is about people who are struggling financially and are having a hard time making ends meet. He's written several other books as well. The Grapes of Wrath is probably his best known book, published in 1939, more than 20 other novels. And he won the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1962. So that's a big deal. This guy became very successful, very famous. He is a classic author. So John Steinbeck wrote and lived through the Great Depression. He wrote a lot of his books based on this time period, which is in the 1930s. This was the most severe economic downturn in American history. So that means economy in the toilet. This is unlike anything that we have ever experienced in our lifetimes in the US. People were struggling financially in a way that was just completely unprecedented. So the Great Depression began in 1929 with the stock market crash. It lasted throughout the entire 1930s. So our book is set in the 1930s and deals with issues of the Great Depression. It lasted until American involvement in World War II. Unemployment rates rose to 30%. So that means that almost 1/3 of people in the US couldn't find a job. And we know that having a job, maybe you all have started looking for jobs or have your first job right now. And that's how you make money, right? That is how you afford to buy things. That's how people put food on the table, have a roof over their heads, provide for their families. So if you don't have a job, this is not a good situation for 30% of Americans. 50% of commercial banks failed. So this kind of blows my mind, but this basically means that the banks ran out of money. If you had saved and invested your money in a bank, you were kind of out of luck, like money was gone. The crop prices fell by 50%. So a lot of people at this time were working on farms or working in agriculture. If you were selling your crops for $1, now they're only worth 50 cents. And this is completely impacting people's financial situation. So this obviously leads to hunger. People don't have enough food, despair. They're kind of out of hope. They have no hope or joy in their life. Poverty, homelessness, people didn't have a place to live. So millions of Americans had their lives destroyed. And this is what John Steinbeck was living through, and it obviously impacted him to write these books about people who are really struggling financially. So here we have some famous images captured from the Great Depression. I'm sure you've learned about this in history. You've maybe seen similar images of people's homes and farms just in disrepair. You can see the buildings are just falling apart. Here, someone from the bank is asking for money. Of course, there is no money. No one has any money at this point. And here's an example of some people that are migrant workers. They're moving from place to place, setting up kind of temporary shelters or housing, and they work on the land. They work on farms. So migrant workers, this is still a job that people do today as well, but we are talking about in the context of the 1930s. This was before technology was created. We didn't have tractors or plows, machinery to take care of the farms. So humans actually had to do most of the work on the farm by hand. Between the 1880s and the 1930s, thousands of men would travel the countryside in search of work on farms. This kind of work that migrant workers did included harvesting crops, doing odd jobs on the farm or the ranch, basically doing whatever work was needed. The migrant workers really were not making much money. They would earn about $2.50 or $3 a day. They would get food and shelter, but obviously this is not a lot of pay for the work that they're doing. And during the 1930s, the unemployment rate was so high in the US, so many men were searching for work, that agencies were actually set up to send farm workers to where they were needed. So we're going to see this in our novel with the two main characters. We'll meet them right away in the first chapter, two men named George and Lenny. They are given work cards from Murray and Reddy's, which is one of the farm work agencies. All right, so our book of Mice and Men deals with issues of the exploitation of migrant workers. So exploitation, just a big word that means like taking advantage of them. So the migrant workers in this book are not treated fairly, and we are going to see that. It also deals with issues of the failure of the American dream. So we talked about this when we read A Raisin in the Sun, that the American dream is not always possible for everyone in the same way. We've looked at that from the lens of racism in A Raisin in the Sun, and we will see some other setbacks to the American dream in this book as well. The book also deals with the issues of America's general moral decline. People don't care about each other. They're not acting in a kind or good way, and that will be displayed in our book. All right, so your job right now is to start reading chapter 1 and take notes, answer the reading questions in your packet, and then the should do is a video on theme. I hope you enjoy the first chapter.